Okay, so as my studio is being torn to pieces at the minute, it's probably a good time just to sort of show you what I use and talk a little bit about it. Salisbury thing's pretty cool, sort of very digital. It's kind of like an Arduino that you can like program different synths. You have to upload them from a little bit of software, which is really simple, really quick, and you can kind of turn it into a drum machine. It becomes independent little synths and drum machines. Drum machines not the most advanced. I was kind of excited by the idea of sort of 8-bitty kind of glitchy drum beats. It doesn't quite do what I was hoping, but for the synths actually it's very cool. They're kind of like the waveforms that it can use is pretty interesting, and they use a lot of them, so they can kind of be manipulated to do quite different sounds, so it's cool. 303, this is very cool actually. I like this. What's really interesting about this one is it's got the CV out, so it can send to any of my other sort of CV receiving gear, so you can kind of get that 303 acid line sound into any of your kit very simply through this. Easy to program, very jammable. Does a few things that the original 303 doesn't do. Sounds great, and yeah, I think it was well worth the money actually. And not that I would use 303 in everything, but you know, for the electronic genre, I think having one of these, or having something that does that particular sound, is a kind of necessity really, because it is very much part of the history of electronic music. So below that, and a little bit jammed in actually, we've got the O Coast. Weird thing, I just sort of jam with it, record it, sample it. It's different to any other analog piece of kit that I've used before. I think that's what means that I've kept it, because I just find that I can get sounds out of this that I can't really get out of anything else. It doesn't follow any kind of traditional form of synthesis. It sort of does its own thing really, hence the no coast. So really cool, and again it's worth the money, but not as an individual sort of first synth. I don't think it quite has enough in it to be your sort of master synth, but if you've got a few bits of kit that do some sort of more traditional sounds, then this is like a nice addition to that after. In behind, I'll have to move this, is the Nix. This was a Dread box. I love this. I think this is incredible. I think it's got such a rich bottom end to the tones that it makes. It just sounds incredibly big on any recording. The reverb thing in it is just a bit weird and unique. It's like huge, so that's very cool because you can also send audio signals through it. It makes it kind of unique. I don't do a lot of patching with it, I just use it a lot as is, but it's a very clever and very good sounding synthesizer. The Mother 32, I was a bit disappointed with this when I first got it, because I had the Nix already and I had the O Coast. I was expecting sort of more of sort of cool weirdness, but it can do it, it does do it. It takes a little bit of a learning curve, but as the sort of default sound, it just sounds warm and nice, but with nothing outstanding. So I wasn't particularly taken with it. Almost got rid of it, but I persevered with it. Got my head around the sequencer, which isn't the easiest or the best, but started to sort of develop patterns and techniques, and it's grown on me a lot, and I'm starting to sort of fall in love with it actually, with the possibilities. The patch bay is very good. It's nice and out of the way as well, which is nice, your hands are free. The MIDI, again, it means it's ultimately nicely controllable in a DAW, but yeah, it's grown on me, that one. Down the bottom we got the Electron machine drum. It's been around in my arsenal for a long time. A lot of my beats are made on it. It's an incredible machine. I really like it. It's got a very unique drum sound. It doesn't sound like traditional drum machines in many senses, even though it's sort of trying to represent some. And with the locks, you can really sort of push it off on its own journey, which we all love, sort of the Electron thing for that. So yeah, and as it was their very first one, really powerful, and it had the control all function when you're working with patterns right from the get-go, and then it wasn't on later models, and now it's come back, I see, and I think that's a welcome return, because I thought that was particularly powerful. Audio ins and outs are really good as well, so passing stuff through it makes it a useful bit of kit for that. So all in all, yeah, it's if you can get one, yeah, worth it. I have the original, which I would like to upgrade, but I'm not too worried because this does what I need it to do. And then under here I have the mono machine as well, which I think for me is one of the most sophisticated drum machines I have. Actually, I use it a lot for drums. That sort of FM-y kind of clicky sound. Very good synthesizer, very digital and gritty, and cuts through in the mix. Very cool machine. I think this personally is probably my favourite piece of kit that I own. It's served me so well and really does appear on most of the tracks that I've ever made. So yeah, and I've had it a long time and I love it. Digitact. I'm not really. It seems like I might be an Electron fanboy. I'm not really. I find their way of working a little bit difficult. I find certainly with these two that I've lost tracks really easily with the save functions, and they've even just completely dumped tracks and it from memory altogether. So a bit glitchy. So it's like record and record everything, and don't get too precious about hanging on to it because it may not keep it. The Digitact, I got excited about it when it first came out, and I waited and waited and waited. I waited for the price to drop because I wasn't keen on spending as much as it was on a sampler, considering I have my DAWs inside of my computer that can handle a lot of sampling processing. But I found one. I got one cheap second hand, and I wasn't that taken with it at first. Actually, I found it to be not that sophisticated a sampler, and it wasn't very exciting. But I started to really sort of delve into it, get to know it a bit better, and force myself to use it, and it has become not an essential piece of kit. I could get rid of it, but it has its uses, and it has specific uses around. I like it for MIDI, I like it for live performance, and it has a reasonably good workflow compared to the other Electron equipment. So yeah, if you can get one cheap, I think it's worth it. So that's that. And then the Octatrack. So I bought that, was a bit disappointed and a bit disheartened because it didn't do exactly what I was sort of hoping to do straight away. So I was like, I can't afford the Octatrack, it's very expensive. And then the new ones came out, and I just saw the second-hand market of the old ones, just the price dropped dramatically on them. And considering Electron brought in all the stuff that was on the new one into this one, and knowing full well that the build quality of these things is particularly good, I couldn't see the reason for buying the new one when the first generation was under half the price. So yeah, I picked this one up really cheap, and I'm amazed by it. It's an incredible piece of kit, and it does things very differently to this. I think it's a very sophisticated, clever machine. For the age that it is as well, it still holds up really well, and that's why so many people love them. So I wasn't amazed early on by them. I was a little bit like, they seem very, very complicated. But I have to say, when I got my hands on it and started to use it, because of the workflow of these two, I didn't find this very hard at all to understand. It was just the sampling process that I had to work out. But it does a fairly good job of that. It does a lot of slicing for you, and I think for this machine, in comparison to this one, I think this machine lends itself to throwing in some strange sounds and seeing where you can go with them, and working it out that direction, whereas this one, for me, lends itself to having sort of more produced samples and to sequence them. So it is the drum performer. It's always its selling point, and I think it sort of suits it to be that, even though I've heard some amazing ambient stuff using this. I think this machine does it and some more, which it would do because it's the more expensive one. So yeah, that's I would say to anyone that's thinking about it, it's definitely worth the investment. MIDI keyboard, audio interface, EMU, old school. This I've had since the 90s, so it's sort of programmed the way I want it. It was, I think, originally designed to be a sort of pad synth. That was its sort of job. It has a very digital reverb and delay in it, which on the presets is just everything's washed in it, and it's not the nicest sound. Certainly in this day and age, for the time it was probably okay, but it has very digital sounds. It's a bit of a memory diver to get in there and program, but I have to say, for what you would pay for one of these now, I think you get a lot for your money. Really, really powerful synth, can do an awful lot of stuff. It has a great digital sound, and I think when you've got the warmth of analog, you need some of that really dirty digital to cut through, and it can do some pretty huge pads, but it's great for kind of sort of take all the reverbs and delays off of it and just get into the sort of designing of a waveform, because it has a lot to choose from, and just sequencing that cold and then using sort of VST plugins or guitar pedals or anything you want to get the kind of effects out of it, to bring it out. Yeah, I think it's oh, my recording stopped. Yeah, so just to kind of cover that, I think its workflow's pretty hard work, but there we go. It is what it is, and it's a good synth for the time, and I think it still holds up today. So that's that. I have a few other little bits and pieces that I kind of bring in and out. What was it? It's the Korg MS2000R rack. Very, very cool. I've had that a very, very long time, and I won't be ever getting rid of it. It's cool. And it does, again, some really, really cool sort of digital sounds, but it's kind of easy to program, so you can have a sound in your head and get to it very, very, very quickly with it. I have other samplers, the Zoom sample tracks, which I'll probably talk about at some point again later in another video, because it's a really underrated sampler, and you can pick them up so cheap, and I think it can do some incredible things, to the point where I own 3 and I've used them for a couple of decades. They make some really particular sampled effect sounds, which I can't really think of anyone else that does anything like it. They also have a sort of lo-fi quality to them, and they also have really, really, really wicked little sample editing mode, which means you can put a sample in and edit it within a few seconds. So we'll come back to that at a certain date, but yeah, so that's, I think, for the majority, that's what I'm using at this moment in time. I switch stuff out, change things around. I don't try and stick to a formula or the studio staying as the same setup all the time, because I like things to move and earn their place in my studio, and not to be just sort of sitting there gathering dust. They have to be working for why they're in the setup, and if they're not, then I switch them for something else. It also helps to change up your workflow and work pattern, not to have a permanent, constant setup, because you can get a little bit sort of stuck in in your ways and not even realise it. Then I think I'll do computer stuff later. Alright, cool.